Transelectronic Labs presents The Martian Agenda. Please click a thumbs up, please subscribe, and please leave a comment below. It all makes a big difference. On to the story. This is a work in progress short story about a future Mars that has been colonized and terraformed starting around 2040 by Elon Musk. This short story takes place in about 3024, about 1,000 years in the future from today. And Mars has already been colonized and terraformed, and not all of Mars is green. There's still a lot of it that's dusty, but there are patches that have been made habitable using geodesic domes and other technologies. Our story today centers around two old friends, Sarah and Romulo. And these two individuals grew up together on Mars. And they are, believe it or not, second-generation Martians. The first generation of Martians lived incredibly long due to gene splicing and DNA therapy and all sorts of things that Elon Musk had worked with Ray Kurzweil to implement. And those first settlers really had to endure some horrific gene therapy in order to survive on Mars. The atmosphere was completely different than on Earth. There were toxins on Mars that they weren't aware of. The gravity made their bone, the lighter gravity made the human bones brittle, so they had to engineer their bones to be thicker and to grow differently. And there were all sorts of DNA and RNA patches that were applied to people in that first generation, the first ones. And they lived, some of them lived to be 800 or 900 years old. The second generation of Martians that Sarah and Romulo are part of, they also lived to be about 800 or 900 years. And Sarah and Romulo in this story, I think, about 300 to 400 years old at this point. So they're about halfway through their life, and they've kind of gone out and explored the known universe, and they've come back to Mars, and they've hooked up, and they're really excited about exploring all these stories that they heard as kids from the old ones, the first ones. And Sarah and Romulo spent a long time apart due to something that was called, the incident. And it's not much is known about it yet. We're going to find out about it, but it was something that caused them to spend a century apart. And in that century, they both had a lot of experiences. And they've come back together since then, but still, they're still putting everything back together after that. So we catch up with Sarah and Romulo. It's about 2034. They're about 400 years old, which is equivalent to, say, like 40, 45 in normal 2024 terms. All right. All right, Chapter 1 of The Martian Agenda. For months now, Sarah and Romulo have been traveling across the dusty Martian plains in search of an ancient city, its entrance hidden amongst the debris-strewn post-apocalyptic landscape. Their search, fueled by the stories they heard as children as told to them by the first ones, these first ones, they told stories of an ancient yet advanced civilization located underground on ancient Mars. Located in a city that had an infinite power source. And that power source had once powered a Martian civilization that spanned beyond just the planet Mars in a long-forgotten past. Now, these stories that the first ones told, for most Martians of this generation, they were just that, stories. Fictions that were told to children as bedtime stories. But to those that knew the truth and that remembered the early years, such as the first ones, they know that these are not fiction and that they are actual ground truth. Over time, this knowledge began to be suppressed, and the first ones had to go underground with all of their information. And they ended up forming what they called the Martian Mystery Schools, architected after the early Egyptian mystery schools. And it was a network of libraries and universities and institutions that kept the ancient knowledge alive. And they had their networks air-gapped and separate from the global Martian data networks, so that their information would never get found out and they could keep their secrets. This ancient network, these Martian mystery schools, they are called the First Net. And when Romulo and Sarah were recruited, from that point on, they've spent their lives dedicated to FirstNet and the first ones, and gathering and archiving all of the information that they could find about that first ancient civilization. And throughout their research and their travels, all of their information has pointed them to what's called Salisbury Mound on Mars. And on Salisbury Mound, this ancient structure is the entrance to the Lost City. The first ones had created their own AI in FirstNet, and it's named Samantha. We catch up with Sarah and Romulo in their rover crossing the dusty Martian plains. And our first introduction to them is in the cabin of their rover. And their AI, Samantha, speaks to them. "Hey, Sarah. We have arrived at the structure." Samantha mentions some data about the trip, power reserves in the rover, and the weather conditions for the next 24 hours. Finally at their destination, Sarah excitedly points out an odd rock outcropping to Romulo. "Take a look at that formation there, Rom," her hand jutting past his face to point at a rock formation. Her hand passing so closely that Rom feels the wind on his face and smells the newly printed polymers in the sleeve of her spacesuit. Pulling her hand back and giving him some space, Sarah says with more control but still very excited, "Can you see the geometric stones forming an archway?" "Yes," Rom says, "I see the geometry." Rom, a longtime believer, is daydreaming about how relieved he is that his partner has finally discovered the real Martian history. There have been so many times he has wanted to share things with her, but he couldn't, because she just wasn't ready. He is snapped out of his revelrous daydream by Sarah's continued excitement. "You see that stone arch, right, Rom? Just like in the stories." She takes a breath and says, "I've reconned this location already, and that frickin' archway leads to a set of stairs, man. Frickin' stairs!" "Unplanned," they say in unison. "Just like in the stories of old." "Jinx!" they both yell out. They look into each other's eyes and burst out in laughter, laughing so hard that tears stream down their faces and they can't breathe. They've been searching for these stairs for decades, and here they finally are. All the nights of searching and fruitless hunts, they've finally located the legendary stairway to the lost city. And after the tears of joy and happiness start running, and while our faces still hurt from sighing, Sarah says triumphantly, "Here it is! Here it is! It even has the face carved in stone next to the giant hand. It's all here, just as the first one's stories foretold." Ram deposits his caffeinated protein drink into the drink holder, then leans closer to the window. Seeing Ram start to squint and blink like a broken robot, Sarah quickly activates the rover's visual systems, darkening the window tint and enhancing the visual augmentations. "Thank you, Sarah. My old ocular implants are in much need of some maintenance." He tries to wink at his loved companion, but his implants glitch, causing his left eye to twitch while running a self-diagnostic, which includes a very hard-to-watch ocular implant calibration routine. Without missing a beat, and as if his eyes aren't having a Freaky Friday moment, Sarah stops the rover and says to him in a voice that is both excited and scared, "Just through that stone bleh." Sarah stops the rover and says to him in a voice that is both excited and scared, "Just through that stone archway is a staircase that leads down to the ancient city that the first ones told us about. Those old stories, they were all true, Ram." Of the two of them, Sarah was the more pragmatic and conservative in her assumptions about the past. Romulo, having spent significant time with the ancient shamans, he learned their lore and heard their stories, and he was already steeped in their beliefs. And his partner's newly found and unexpected passion for the ancient knowledge filled him with such joy. He felt a great sense of relief to be back on Mars with Sarah after they'd been separated for far too long due to the Omega incident. And once reunited, they vowed they would never be separated again. Sarah quickly flicks switches and push buttons on the rover's control panel, activating the onboard AI's remote mode and putting the rover control system into active listening mode, making the rover act as the central AI hub, tethering Sam and Romulo to the FirstNet datanet, giving them access to the First One's information while they explore the underground city. After numerous sensor and remote feed checks, Sarah and Ram carefully exit the rover. Sarah having the rover's data feed up in her left eye, and Ram having the cam feeds in his left eye. As they make their way to the archway, Ram says quietly, as if to himself, "Gotta watch out for the artifacts on the surface. Most of them are inert, but a few have been found to cause significant problems for those that activate them." As Ram says this, Sarah cuts in excitedly. "There are so many technological artifacts here. It's a wonder no one has reported on any of this." Then what Ram just said sinks in, and Sarah realizes the truth. People have found these artifacts, and people have reported them, but all of this has been kept secret, and all of this knowledge has been suppressed by the corporation for a millennia. Sarah and Romulo lock eyes, and Sarah says, "You were right, Ram. I'm so sorry. It took me so long to see it too." Ram smiles a crooked smile and puts his gloved hand on her spacesuit helmet cheek as if he were holding her face in his hand and says, I'm just really happy that we're here right now after the incident. Nothing else really matters. They close their eyes and they bump helmets, making a muted plastic bonk sound. A tradition they've had since kids, when they would first go exploring outside the domes on Mars. They look into each other's eyes and smile, and start the long journey down the rough-hewn carved tunnel leading to the underground city. End part 1.